Brent Gleeson, welcome to the World Class Dads podcast.
Good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You are officially the first Navy SEAL on the show, or former Navy SEAL. I don't know. Is that once a Navy SEAL, always a Navy SEAL?
That probably applies
here. Just to kick things off, I would love if you would just dive a little bit into your background, kind of how you found yourself on the SEAL teams, kind of what came before that, and then what got you here today, just to fill the listeners in.
Sure. Yeah. It's actually kind of an interesting story. I mean, I think most people's journey into the SEAL teams is probably an interesting story, but I grew up in Dallas, Texas, did my undergrad at Southern Methodist University, got degrees in finance and economics. And during that period of my life, never had any real vision of military service. Now, keep in mind, I graduated about a year before 9/11. We weren't at war back then, so it was peacetime. So a little bit different mindset when it comes to service back then. Mm-hmm. My dad had been in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, but never really talked about it, never pushed military service on me, nor my twin brother. And so I'd always had a fascination with it, and I'd read some, obviously, books around special operations and the SEAL teams in college, but not much. And so I graduated and I took a job as a financial analyst with a global firm based in Dallas. Now, during that time, I had a very close college friend of mine who was a year behind me. So he was now a senior at SMU. He was actually one of these young men who'd had a lifelong passion, a vision, a dream of one day graduating, joining the Navy, and at least attempting to be accepted into the notorious SEAL training pipeline. And while I thought that was very admirable, of course, I also deemed it to be somewhat of an unrealistic career path for a young man, knowing the rigors of the training and the extremely high attrition rate and the dangers of the job in general. And, but still had in the back of my mind, obviously a fascination with SEALs. Now, keep in mind back then, I had this wildly unrealistic vision, holding SEALs and special operators up on this pedestal, being these fire-breathing, glass-eating behemoths. You could put you 6 feet under just with their steely-eyed stare. I found out later that was all true. But he and I actually started training together when I was out in the corporate world. He was a senior and started to really prepare for that journey. For me, it was just a way to stay fit and help him out a little bit. And so obviously by nature, we started spending a lot of time together, more so than we did in college, and having a lot of dialogue and conversations about the implications of what he was about to take on and the risks involved and the level of training and mindset transformation he'd have to go through just to be accepted into the program. That's the easy part, even though it's not that easy. And so nights and weekends, running, swimming, training for marathons, calisthenics, all designed to prepare him for the SEAL entrance exam. And all that dialogue, increased that level of fascination. So I started doing more research and reading more books about SEALs in Vietnam, the history of our underwater demolition teams in World War II, which were essentially our forefathers as frogmen. And long story short, that growing fascination, coupled with the somewhat boring nature of my entry-level financial analyst position, led to the culmination of making a final decision to, not have that on my list of regrets when I die, and engage in a little purposeful suffering and giving to a cause greater than myself. And so I quit my job. My parents were shocked, and I was like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I'm quitting my job and enlisting in the Navy."
And this is what, a year out of college?
Yeah, about 10 months. About 10 months out of college. I graduated, took a couple months off, and then went right into the job.
Got it.
And my buddy and I, with whom I'd been training, moved up to a little town called Crested Butte, Colorado, where we trained for another 6 months at super high altitude, about 10 to 11,000 feet, so that we could get into the best physical condition that we possibly could to mitigate any risk when it comes to fitness preparedness. Now, the mindset is different, but our philosophy there was to focus on what was in our control, which is fitness, and leave that to the side when we got to SEAL training. Meaning, like, I don't need to worry about my fitness. I got that. I need to worry about all the other internal and external factors and emotions and things that I'll have to deal with once I get through the brutal crucible of training. And that's what took us to BUD/S. Went to boot camp in July. 2 months later, I was out here in San Diego, checking in for SEAL training. It was a wild ride.
Wow. And so how long were you in the teams for?
About 6 years. Not these days, that's not a very long time. But I also had not planned on doing it as a career. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind, when I went in, I didn't realize 9/11 was going to happen. So,
So this is all pre 9/11.
Yeah, just pre 9/11. So the SEAL training pipeline is well over a year, but usually what you see on TV, movies, documentaries, et cetera, is what's called BUDS,
Yep.
or basic underwater demolition SEAL. It's the first 6 months of that pipeline. That's where they weed everybody out in your class. You'll start with 200 or more students, between 20 and 30 will graduate. Then you'll go on to advanced training or SEAL qualification training. And then you graduate, get your trident, and go to your team. So 2 days before we started advanced training was 9/11.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's when everybody in the community and the military in general and the world, started going through what's now been a pretty much permanent transformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll reinforce your resolve to to do what you're doing there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So when for you did kids come into the picture?
That came much later. So I did several combat deployments, kind of stuck to my plan of transitioning out, getting back into the world of business, and went to graduate school. Started that program about a week after getting out of the Navy. My transition plan was to have zero downtime.
Yeah.
I didn't want any time where I wasn't working or wasn't focused on new goals, because that can lead to not great things. So especially transitioning out of the military, doing what we did,
Mm-hmm.
and then grad school, and then launched right into the world of entrepreneurship. That was another speeding freight train that has about the same failure rate as SEAL training. So I don't know. I acquired a taste for risk.
Yeah, it seems.
And then I met my wife at a wedding in Costa Rica. Another interesting story, like her best childhood friend, they known each other since second grade, growing up in Newport Beach, California, married one of my best SEAL team buddies, a guy I went through BUDS with, advanced training. We were both at SEAL Team 5, deployed together. And so their wife, and my wife and his wife were best friends growing up. We met, and I met my wife at their wedding. So my wife was the maid of honor, and there's a wedding down in Costa Rica. I came solo, and it was another speeding freight train after that. We got matching tattoos after 4 weeks of knowing each other. And then we got married 2 months after that.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I love that.
And then to answer your question, though, we found out we were pregnant with our youngest, or excuse me, our daughter on our honeymoon. So
wow.
we got right into it.
Yeah. So you're a man not fond of transition time. You just go from one thing to the next, clearly.
Call it a violent execution, my friend.
Yeah. All right. So you find out that you're pregnant, or you get pregnant on the honeymoon. And now how many kids do you have, and what are their ages?
We have 3 kids, and we have a new baby on the way, coming any week now. So technically the due date's January 7th, but both my wife and her doctor think the baby is probably going to come next week. So.
Perfect. Right as your book launches.
Exactly. We thought 2020 wasn't chaotic enough, so let's have another human.
Yeah, why not? You're not traveling as much, so might as well pile some other stuff on.
Exactly.
So I guess going back to the kind of the backstory. So you had that first one's coming along. You are on your entrepreneurial journey at that point. Kind of what's going on from a business standpoint when your first kid's born?
I had the first company I started right out of grad school. Very cliche. I met my business partner in graduate school, and we launched our first company kind of during the end of grad school, and really hit the ground running as soon as we graduated, which was basically a home finding search engine, an early version of Trulia, Zillow, that type of thing, which was newer at the time, and we were actively riding the wave of the housing bubble up. We never thought that ride was going to end, and then it did.
Yeah, sure it did.
Despite the warnings of our economics professors and even my dad, that this is a bubble and this is not going to last. And so when we started seeing, obviously, the bell curve of the economy starting to shift and the housing market implode, we pivoted quickly, kind of like a lot of us have done this year. Having learned so much about technology and search engines and analytics, so we started a digital marketing, media, and analytics agency based on that. So we had raised money for that first company, and so what we did was we borrowed money from that company to start the new company, gave those shareholders equal common stock shares in the new business, and as that other business started to plateau and shrink, the other business really took off, started doubling in size, both in revenue and headcount every single year. And that was right around that time is when we had our daughter. And then our son, our kids are, our youngest son is 4. So she's now 6, he's 4. Their birthdays are 5 days apart. So we had him the perfect 2-year spread. And then we've got a new one coming here soon. Now we do also have my son who's 14. He was from my practice marriage from when I was in the SEAL teams. Okay. I'll spare the details of that whole situation, but he lives with us full time, and he's a great kid. So we have a freshman in high school. We've got a first grader. We've got a preschooler. And now we're gonna have a newborn.
Okay. So you have a few experiences of, having kids and young kids, especially when you've got a lot going on in your life professionally, whether, you're in the teams, and, probably not home a ton for that, or in the thralls of building a business, which is, as anybody who's done it before knows, an enormous effort and time commitment. So in those phases with the young ones and trying to, be there as a, either emotionally and physically as a good dad and showing up for your family while kicking ass at what you're doing and being at the top tier, literally in the SEALs, being at the top tier of military personnel, or likewise in business, trying to just be in that top tier of business and being one of those few companies that survives, especially during a time of economic hardship. What was your approach, or how did you balance those things of family and demanding professional endeavors?
I think the first part of the answer is that I didn't initially balance it all that well. And that's fluctuated over the years, depending upon where the business has gone, where my career has gone. So it's very situational, depending upon the pressures of business, the pressures of the job, the pressures to generate income, to support a family, to support a growing family. Mm-hmm. And with my second company, I didn't travel all that much. But then I started getting into speaking more at trade shows and conferences. And the segue into what I do now started with the launch of my Forbes leadership column. It's kind of it's interesting how that happened. I had, found that I liked writing blogs for the company and things like that, but found a passion for writing about leadership and organizational excellence and mindset and culture and resilience. And I landed a column on Forbes, which initially was a great thought leadership channel to generate content around the brand of that company. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the initial goal, just for some great content marketing, distribution, et cetera. And then soon after launching or being accepted to write that column, my first article came out. And soon after that article, the head of Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Asia Pacific, he's now a very close friend of mine. We're godparents to each other's children, and he's now number 3 in the whole global organization of Bank of America. He sent me a personal email. He had read my first article in the Forbes column. It was called From the Battlefield to the Boardroom. And he was like, this is great. He's this really high energy, super fitness obsessed Australian guy living between London, Hong Kong, and Sydney. And he was like, this is awesome. I love the concepts here. He's very fascinated by the world of special operations and just high performance in general. I mean, he's only a few years older than me. He's like number 3 at Bank of America. So high performance mindset kind of guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, to say the least. And so he asked me if I would come do a series of keynote presentations and workshops over the course of 3 days at their Global Leadership Summit in Hong Kong. And he didn't ask if I was a speaker, a consultant, didn't want to see videos, didn't say, do you have a website or any references? None of that. He just liked the article and he thought that was cool enough for him. So being an entrepreneur, of course, I was like, absolutely. Yeah. And then I sent the email, I turned to my wife, I was like, oh shit. What did I just commit to? I have no idea what I'm doing here. But again, it kind of goes back to, relentless preparation, for anything you think you might find a passion for, any goal, personal and professional goal. So I prepared some content. I bounced the content off him. So I worked with him on the content messaging and the approach for the workshops, the keynotes, and we got it to a really good place. And then I just rehearsed relentlessly, night and day, leading up to that event, which was only 5 weeks after the email was sent to commit to it. I didn't know how to charge for this stuff. I was like, I don't. And now looking back, I got screwed because I didn't start feeling that. But being new at it, I didn't really have a track record of being able to charge a lot of money. But that is my point being is that is when my travel schedule really started to ramp up. So running a traditional agency, I was, as CEO, I was in the office all day long, traveled maybe once a month at the most to our other offices in Vegas and New York, but mostly home. But then I started speaking more, and that event led to another event and another event. And I found a passion for the speaking. And this was the beginning of sort of my segue beyond that second company. And obviously I had a board of directors, we'd raise money, business partners. So obviously I had an ethical and fiduciary responsibility to lead that company. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I kept finding all these opportunities. There were, quite frankly, good sales and business opportunities for that company because I would have a captive audience for an hour and then ask for a follow-up call with a CEO or chief marketing officer, and that could segue to business for that company. But that's when my travel schedule really started to ramp up, and I didn't balance it very well. Obviously, the philosophy in my mind was, well, it's my job to, make money and build wealth for us and support the family, and then you find yourself on the speeding freight train and you're never home. And it was exhilarating, it was exciting, but at the same time, it wasn't cool because I was missing those really cool early stages of our children's development, where they're becoming people with their own vocabulary and attitudes and personalities. And, it's not fun to do that. I watched a lot of SEAL team guys do that over Skype, these days, over FaceTime and stuff like that. And I didn't want to raise my kids that way. But that speeding freight train lasted for quite a while. As we started to build a business around the speaking, I sold that second company in 2016 and then wrote my first book as sort of step one to the third company. My first book is Taking Point, a book about leadership, culture, and organizational transformation. Basically a modern take on change management in the 21st century, pulling from, some of the ideals of the special operation community's constant transformation since 9/11. And then started building curriculum and a team around that, and started landing more consulting clients that also really required my time on site with those consultants as well. Not just my team, but they wanted me there too, which was both great and not great because, when you build a brand of a company, the brand can't just be you. Mm-hmm. You can't exit from that, and then it requires all your time, and then you can only go so far. Right. And then a little global pandemic came along because my wife was like, how do we get you off the road? So one of our 2020 strategic imperatives was to build programs for our clients that really could utilize our team more so than me, so that I could be working on the business, not in the business, et cetera. And we were working on that, and it was going well, but it got massively accelerated by COVID-19. So since March, I've only traveled twice. and now my wife's asking me, so when's your next trip?
Right. Yeah. All of a sudden, let's get a little bit back into that.
Don't you have any travel coming up?
Nice. So the stars aligned in a way. Obviously, this year's come with plenty of challenges for all of us, but to start realigning your schedule to be home with the family and around for more of those things.
And that was the goal. It just got, one of the silver linings from this year has been, and not just for me, but for a lot of brands and companies and organizations rethinking, their workspace needs. I feel bad for the commercial real estate professionals out there, because people like me are calling to renegotiate or cancel their lease, because everybody's gone through this forced digital transformation, which is good. It's actually, in a lot of ways, the organizations that have innovated and adapted really quickly are going to come out of this and probably recapitalize their business a little bit. They're going to come out of this strong, more efficient, and saving money in quite a lot of areas. Think of all the events that I usually do, speaking or consulting. You're flying people all over the world and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in hotel fees and venues and event planning companies. And now we do stuff like this. It was uncomfortable at first, but people are used to it now. And so there's a lot of interesting things that have come out of this. So.
Oh, no doubt. There's a few things in there that you mentioned that I want to dive into a little bit. One of the things that I thought was interesting is you mentioned how you started getting more speaking opportunities, and that kind of organically grew. Being the entrepreneur that you are, you took advantage of those opportunities and you were prepared and had the right mindset to do so. But then you said that it grew into a passion, or you discovered that there was a passion there. And this is something that, personally, I always am fascinated by is, especially when I'm 31 now, but as I was in my 20s trying to find my passion. And that's like the big thing. Chase your passion, do what you're passionate about, and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
And turns out that is fucking hard to do and makes no sense. And I don't even know where to start with that. So I would love if you could just talk a little bit about that concept of like how you realized, like you stumbled into it a way, but you had prepared yourself in many other ways, but how you realized that that was kind of a passion you wanted to pursue.
I think I love what you said there, because I was talking about this with a buddy of mine the other day, and the guy, my former classmate and SEAL teammate, David Goggins, I'm sure you know who he is, or your listeners will know. He wrote the foreword for my new book, and I texted him because he had done one of his posts, and his post was kind of related to this topic, because we talk about, we got to find our purpose. I got to find my passion and chase the passion, like you said, then I'll never work a day in my life. Well, sometimes that leads us in a little too much reflection and causal thinking, and wondering, well, I shouldn't do anything yet because I haven't really found my purpose, or I'm going to jump from job to job because I'm really trying to find my passion. And then 6 years go by, 10 years goes by, and you haven't done shit.
Right.
Because you're sitting around trying to find your purpose or define your passion and what that is. Well, it really comes down, in my opinion, to discipline, hard work, and hard work breeds opportunity, and opportunity breeds new pathways for us to eventually find things that we're truly passionate about. Just like when you're the kid coming out of college or grad school, and you don't want that job opportunity or this great opportunity because you think that's not really where you want to go. But the people I've seen who are most successful is they take the good opportunity, even though it's not exactly what they want, and they work their asses off. And that hard work opens the door to other opportunities, or other networking, or other people they might meet that will shed light on areas where they are more passionate about. Because I don't think we really find, what we're deeply passionate about in life. A lot of us don't find it really early on because we haven't had enough experience to understand what we do like, what we are emotionally connected to, versus just what might be a job, not a career, or not a passion. So it comes down to really hard work, execution, discipline, personal accountability. All those things usually sound harsh to some people, but those are the pathways to enlightenment. Those attributes are the pathways to true happiness and fulfillment. We sit around too long trying to think about what our purpose is, then too much time goes by, we haven't accomplished much. So in my experience, it's finding and seizing opportunities, taking calculated risk, not blind dumb risk, but calculated risk, and then working relentlessly at that, down that path until another potential path might open up to you. And then eventually you find things that you really, truly love to do. Some people find that early on, and that is their true goal, true passion in life, and that doesn't change. But for most people, at least in my experience, you have to experience a lot of different things in your personal and professional life before you realize what you want, what you absolutely don't want.
Yeah, no, I think it's the less sexy approach, but the realistic and the true approach. And it's the one that I think more people need to hear and understand, because it just, being a millennial and kind of coming out of the 20s with
I wasn't going to bring that up, but
it's my parents had the timing that it required. So
yeah.
But I'm curious, with your kind of getting back on the fatherhood track with your kids, and with your oldest being just in freshman in high school, it might still be early for those conversations, but are there things that you do to try to expose them to life experiences and things like that to help them figure out, what maybe not what their life purpose and passion is, but what the things are that they really want to pursue? Do you have any active role in that, or do you just kind of let them forge their paths?
A little bit of both. I mean, step one, get them off Fortnite. That's the biggest inhibitor. Yeah, so that's
easy task, I'm sure.
I wish I had admitted that game.
Yeah, right.
We wouldn't even be talking right now. I'm sorry. I'd be on my private island somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
No, it's a little bit of both. And obviously as parents, I think I've done some things well and some things I'm constantly trying to improve upon. My parents, for example, did a really good job of opening the door to opportunities for my twin brother and I, and probably sacrificing a lot of other things they could have done, or other things they could have, spent money on or time on, when it comes to being well-rounded in, art and music and academics and sports, all these things we want our children to experience. And of course, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge because they try it and like, oh, I hate that, and they haven't really given it a try yet. Right. And so it's age appropriate too. I mean, obviously there needs to be some maturity that comes with being open-minded to trying new things and sticking with it for at least long enough to realize you actually do dislike it, or you actually do kind of like it and might even love it, and might
right.
for long-term, for a long-term investment of time. But yeah, it's all the sort of those categories of, faith, fitness, the arts, so art and music, and then other types of, my 6-year-old is, she loves riding horses, unfortunately, because I've heard an expensive hobby. We live in a very equestrian area.
Okay.
I was like, oh, this is not good. This
yeah.
And my 4-year-old son, if anybody's going to turn out to be a SEAL, it's going to be him. He just likes running around breaking stuff and shooting things with his toy guns. But in my mind, it's as simple as putting the opportunities in front of them. Yes, as a parent, it requires sacrifice from us, because it usually means more driving, more, a little bit monetary investment in these types of things. But I think it's critical for giving them a well-roundedness that's important for social development. It's important for cognitive development. And it's important for things they'll experience later on, whether they're in college or in their early stages of their career, having at least had those opportunities, whether they, become a classical pianist or, a world-class, writer. That may or may not happen, but at least they've had those opportunities to understand, where, going back to what we said before, where their passions really do lie, where their interests lie. Those change over time, but, we have to at least open the doors to those opportunities. And again, you can't push them too hard. Right. My parents never did that either. So that's one of the lessons I've learned. When we do push kids to it, even if they, let's say it's swimming. I was a swimmer growing up, but I also had, guys on my swim team whose parents had like really, really pushed them down that path. And they were in club swimming. They're in the, high school team. They're just their whole life is swimming. Right. And by the time they're, junior or senior in college, or excuse me, junior, senior in high school, they never wanted to see a pool ever again.
Right. Totally
so
burn out.
There's a balance there, of course.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned their passion might right now be Fortnite or things that lay behind the screens. And I'm sure that, so my daughter's a little, she's not quite there yet. She's just about to turn 1. So how do you approach that? Because I'm sure that you're not the only dad who faces that. And pretty much every dad who's listening is like, yep, I hear that pain. What's your approach? Do you have a thought?
No, and obviously I've talked a lot with my, friends who are dads, colleagues and clients, who are parents, and it is a hot topic, not just video games, but the game Fortnite specifically, as we know. Mm-hmm. And I've even talked to like child psychologists about it in an informal setting, but it really comes down to, like a lot of things, it comes down to balance, setting certain ground rules, and ensuring once those rules are agreed to, as far as like how much time you're going to spend in front of the screen, how much time you're going to spend playing video games versus, schoolwork, chores, spending time with the family, or, pursuing other hobbies, or hell, just getting outside. Once those ground rules are set, they're non-negotiable. We've run into that issue where it's like, well, we have these rules, and then every other day, hypothetically speaking, my son will say, well, I know I'm not supposed to play till 7 p.m. or whatever, and, but I've done all my chores, I've done this, that, can I play a little bit now? We have to really sort of stick to our guns when it comes to these types of rules, because once we get into a round robin of negotiation, then, and especially if you're busy, you're tired, you got like 3 other kids pulling you another direction, you want to just be like, you know what, screw it, just go play. Right. So you can just check that box and get that out of your face and move on to the other issue. And that's why parenting is so difficult, is because it's much harder to stick to the rules and say no than it is to say yes.
Yeah, you don't want to be brushing up on never split the difference negotiation tactics to,
right.
to deal with your kids each night. So when you were in the SEAL teams, it sounded like you really developed, a lot of your value system. And I would imagine a lot of that is what you applied to be initially successful in entrepreneurship. And then clearly there was an interest for people to pay you to come out and teach them how you apply those concepts and how they can apply them to their companies. Are there any of those skills or values or things that you took away from your time in the SEALs that really dictate how you approach and the values you try to implement in your family?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually get that question quite a bit because a lot of these same principles, packaged slightly differently, apply when it comes to building a great team, building a great culture within a small team, having an appropriate set of values, making decisions based on those values. A lot of what we take from the world of special operations around high performance is comes to discipline and accountability and communication, transparency, innovation, collaboration, and also, one interesting line from the Navy SEAL ethos, which is basically our creed, our culture manifesto, talks about how when required, my duties will be swift and violent, yet guided by the very principles I'm set out to defend. Meaning, whether they're your individual core values, your family's core values, your team's core values within an organization. Once we start to deviate from those values and not make decisions based on those values, that's when things start to fall apart. Or if those values have been labeled, they've been named, but they're wildly inauthentic, then they actually add no value at all to a decision-making, to the culture of a team, to the culture of your family. So when I started thinking about the concepts of the new book that's coming out next week, a lot of what I talk about in the book, there's a whole chapter based on core values, but personal core values and family core values. And a lot of us talk about that, or at least what do you value? And many of us haven't sat down and really thought about that, and if high performance teams do it, sports teams, special operators, and great business organizations have a solid set of core values that they operate around. Why shouldn't we do that for our families? Why shouldn't we do that as parents? That way we have a roadmap of guiding principles and going as deep as supporting behaviors or accountability mechanisms so that we can coach them down that path, help them make decisions based on those values. And when there needs to be a coaching moment or a course correction moment, you can story tell around those values, whether they're integrity or accountability or fearlessness or whatever those values might be. You can say, well, we had a little misstep here. We're going to talk about it, but here's where where do you feel you made the wrong decision or took the wrong path based on these values? What did you lose sight of? You can really create a narrative around values so that you can reward behavior based on the values, kind of punish behavior based on those values, and help your children make decisions based on those core values. So that's one thing that we've taken from not just special operations, but what we teach our corporate clients, but also now how we can embed that type of philosophy into a family unit. It creates a level of strength and solidarity that you don't have if you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and everybody is singing off a different sheet of music.
So do you have a set of personal core values and family core values, or are those one and the same?
They're pretty much one and the same because they kind of have developed based on my values, but also integrated with, with my wife's values and now, with our children. We don't shove it down their throat all the time, but it's something that we try to, connect with and connect into, when it comes to, communication, when it comes to just parenting in general. So,
yeah, I'm curious if that's something that you and your wife, and I'm just taking this because it's a concept that personally I find fascinating. And I think that I need to do is sit down and really go through with my wife, like, what do we want our family core values to be? Yeah. And I'm just curious if you went through that process with your wife, or if that's something maybe in the book that you have a kind of a recommended process or strategy around of. Let's hear it. I'm fascinated by it. And this is for me personally. So maybe a listener too will find interest in the process.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's the mental model is called the Personal Values Manifesto. Now, obviously that can extend to a family unit, but it's a very similar process into how a team or company or business unit should develop their core values. not one person behind closed doors saying this is what we will value, but having everyone to have some buy-in and a voice in what those values really need to be. Ultimately, the people who are trying to cultivate those values need to buy into them and have an emotional connection to them, so they're authentic and they can authentically evangelize those values to the team and with others. And so, it really starts with just ideating on, what do you personally value? And these values can be authentic in your current existence as a man, as a father, as a husband, but also, they should be somewhat aspirational too. Somewhat maybe a little bit far reaching to push you out of your comfort zone a little bit, to think about who do I want to be, not when I'm 35, but who do I want to be when I'm 50 or 60 or when my kids are in college? Because as parents, it's not up to us to make sure we mold them to who they're going to be when they're 15 or 16, but who are they going to be as a responsible adult at 30 and 31, 32? And so really sitting down individually as an exercise, what do I personally value? Let's say it's you and your wife doing it. So you can use the Crawford slip method. You can put it on paper in a notepad, whatever. Crawford slip being using Post-it notes, write one core value on a Post-it note, stick it on the wall, think about another one, write it on, stick it on the wall. And then, keep doing that until you can't really think of anything else. Then go back to the list and narrow it down. Because if you have like a list of 10 or 12 core values, you don't have any values. What you need to do is narrow it down to 5 or 6 at the most, really. Because it has to be digestible. It has to be something that you can reference. You can put it into an acronym, whatever you want to do. But the best practices, and this is research-based too, not just my opinion, that really shouldn't stem past 6. So it needs to be a really concise list, because what you're going to do in the next 2 steps is really get granular on what those values mean to you or to your family or to you and your wife by doing the next step, which is, let's say you've narrowed it down to 5 core values. Great. Let's say integrity is one of them. Well, what does that mean? How do we actually define integrity? How do you and I define integrity? How will we communicate that to our children? How do we want them to be able to articulate that? And so you do that by listing supporting behaviors. Okay, what are the behaviors as associates with integrity? What are the behaviors? What are 2 or 3 behavioral norms that that we will list and document? And you think about the actual words you use, the phrases you use, because it's got to be meaningful and concise. So you list 2 or 3 supporting behaviors when it comes to integrity, so that you can understand, okay, this is what we mean by integrity here in this family. These are the behavioral norms that we expect of ourselves and each other. And then the third step is to create what we call accountability mechanisms. So you have your core value of integrity, you have a couple supporting behaviors that helps clarify your definition of integrity from a behavioral standpoint. And then the accountability mechanisms are just what it sounds like. Well, great. So what are we going to do? What mechanisms can we put in place you don't have to go too crazy in detail, but to make sure that I know how to hold myself and each other accountable to these behaviors and the value of integrity. So it's 3 tiers. Oftentimes, we see this a lot in our corporate clients. They have their core values and they're on the website or they're on the wall in a conference room, and that is it. They rarely talk about them. None of the employees could ever articulate them clearly. Maybe they'd get 1 or 2. New employees aren't taught them. It has nothing to do with their onboarding. They're unassociated with rewards and recognition programs. There's no storytelling around the core values at all. So they're not authentic. They don't really live anywhere other than on a wall or on the website. That's why once you have those values, behaviors, and accountabilities defined, they really should live somewhere documented that you can reference. In a family, maybe it's on the fridge, I don't know, or somewhere digital, but they need to be talked about on a regular basis. You need to have that be a living, breathing thing, as opposed to, okay, check the box, we have family core values, now they're on a laminated thing stuck to the fridge. That's just step 1. Right. It has to be part of the lifestyle.
No, that's fascinating. And for the accountability tier of that, do you have an example of what that might look like? And let's use the family unit example of like how you can implement accountability to those core values for your family.
Yeah, basically the accountability is the 3rd deepest level of specificity when it comes to what that value is. And essentially it's an action more than a defined behavior. So if I find myself lacking integrity in a certain situation, 1, obviously you hope that we all have enough emotional intelligence or self-awareness to identify that moment and realize when we may be straying a little bit from how we've defined the behavioral norms associated with the value of integrity. But this is just me totally just making this up, but one might be, especially if you're trying to hold yourself to a high standard of accountability, which is a great way to lead others, is through action. Say, you know what? My accountability mechanism might be different than yours, but when I find myself straying when it comes to integrity, whether it be in a personal situation with a client or whatever it might be, I'm going to stop. I'm going to take stock of that moment. I'm going to write down how did I get myself down that path of straying from that integrity value, and then I'm going to tell you guys about it. I'm just going to say, hey guys, here's a moment today where I fell short, and I want to tell you about it. Because that also accomplishes a couple other things. It creates a culture of transparency. It creates a culture of accountability, which is another great core value when it comes to high performance. That's probably one of the bedrocks of special operations, is what we call extreme ownership or total accountability. And you can't have that just by talking about it. You have to live it and act it and take total ownership over not the wins, but the shortfalls. And then you have to be transparent with your family or your teammates about not just what happened and how you got yourself there and what the mistake was or where you fell short, but what am I going to do about it to make sure that either never happens again or happens less frequently as I continue down my path of course correction.
That's really interesting. That's come up a few times with previous guests too, is this concept of, taking ownership in your mistakes in front of your kids and your family, and that, in the role of dad, it's easy to, not feel like you have to be accountable to your kids, but allowing them to see that and to see you course correct and recognize when you may have, deviated from the path, and show them that that's okay, as long as you take ownership of it and be that living example. And that's just such a powerful exposure to your kids, to be able to see that you display that behavior and take that ownership. That I think you're right. I think that's definitely, as you talk through it, one of my personal core values, and something I would love to pass on to my kids and really implement in the family. And it starts with me and being able to authentically do that. Just within the family.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. So is there anything else, from your time in the SEALs, or it could even be post SEALs and in business now, that you've learned in those ecosystems that now translates and you recognize yourself implementing within the family life?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones obviously is having changed the narrative in my mind around what true adversity really is. So being able to manage stress better, manage anxiety better, through actively kind of leaning into pain and suffering, or leaning into the inevitable obstacles we face in life. And instead of shying away from them, taking stock of the moment, developing a new plan, and moving through those challenging times, as opposed to trying to avoid them. And I've had challenges with that in my professional life as well over time. But one challenge with that, though, is, I find myself, I'm good at managing stress or managing anxiety. And then, then we make the assumption that we can just easily teach that to others who have not been through the same experiences we have. Obviously, my experiences have been radically extreme when it comes to learning how to deal with adversity. Not everybody has the blessing and opportunity of whether it's SEAL training or combat or those other experiences that can be horrible, but at the same time, in a different light, everybody faces adversity. Not making the sports team, or not getting the grade on the test that you wanted, or not getting the job that you had your heart set on. Those are all common things. It doesn't have to relate to combat necessarily, but teaching our children how to, I talk about in the book, when is it too early to teach them to embrace the suck? And I talk about the whole everyone gets a trophy philosophy. And I actually told a funny story about our 4-year-old. He was actually 3 at the time. He was on the soccer team. That's why I put air quotes around that, because we've all watched 3-year-olds play soccer. And it can be quite comical.
Yeah.
And let's just say, I don't want to sound like a jerk, but his level of discipline and accountability on and off the battlefield were lackluster, to say the least. And there was, and parents took turns bringing like the halftime and end of game snacks. And one parent one day brought like a whole box of chicken fingers. I was like, it's kind of a random soccer game snack, but they were popular nonetheless. And so Ryder got his paw on one of the biggest chicken fingers in the box during halftime. And then when they went back on the field, he was carrying his chicken finger with him. It was like the biggest chicken finger I've ever seen. And he was just aimlessly walking around the field, gnawing on his chicken finger opposite end of the field where the ball and all the other kids were. And this was their last game. And so at the end of the game, the coach did a trophy ceremony. He would tell a little story about each kid before, and have the kids guess who that kid is. And the kid would go up and serve the trophy. And of course, the story was, who can tell me who this next kid is? And, he sometimes likes to aimlessly wander the field, in the heat of battle while eating a chicken finger. It's Ryder. And Ryder was so proud of himself. He went up and accepted his trophy, and he was just the whole way home. He was like, my first trophy. Can you believe it? I'm so excited. And in the book, I jokingly say, when we got home, I snatched that trophy out of his hand and say, we don't reward mediocrity in this family. And then, of course, I tell the reader I'm joking. And of course, I prominently found a position in his room for his first big trophy.
Yeah.
It kind of teased up that conversation of, as parents, it can be a complex thing to teach our children about adversity, about pain, about loss, about suffering, and trying to find the meaning in it as opposed to just the emotions we feel in the moment.
Mm. Yeah, I had I had the founder of Spartan Races, Joe DeSena, on the podcast, and he probably takes that to the most extremes of introducing his kids to adversity and pain and suffering.
I believe
it. But it's interesting to hear you talk about it too, because you have experienced such extreme levels of adversity and, in your past. So balancing that introduction to adversity to them, but also recognizing that this is a 3-year-old soccer game that you can't go full Navy SEAL instructor mode on.
Well, and knowing that our children through the course of their lives are going to experience those inevitable obstacles. So we don't have to manufacture necessarily a bunch of adverse situations to teach them about adversity. They'll have those time and time again throughout their lives. Yeah,
no, that is true. Life has a way of serving up adversity, whether or not you try to avoid it. So Brent, if one question I like to close up on is the time machine question. You hear a lot in business podcasts, but kind of reinvented for the family aspect of, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself, maybe right before Ryder was born, and impart one piece of parenting wisdom on that younger version of yourself, is there one thing that you might, one piece of advice or insight that you might give to yourself?
Yeah, I think I would say do a better job of actively managing your list of regrets as a parent now and active at the moment. Oftentimes, we get to a point where we might look back and say, gosh, I could have done this better. Or I should have that, or I should have said this, or I should have taught them that, because it's life. We're busy and we have professional careers and, our relationship with our spouse, and you're balancing. We don't often realize it because it becomes normal that as a parent with one child or multiple children and a career and hobbies and other interests, your balancing act can get really, really out of control. But we're not paying attention because it feels normal, even though it's in the midst of chaos. But I guess if I had to choose one off the top of my head, I would say, actively manage that list of regrets. Literally, and I have this in the last chapter of the book, create a model. It says, when it comes to family, I don't want to regret ... When it comes to relationships, I don't want to regret this. When it comes to being a dad, I don't want to regret this. When it comes to being the dad to a son, being the dad to a daughter, those are kind of different things. And then trying to live by those, so it comes down to being better at planning and execution. That's kind of another focus of the new book, is being intentional about these things, not just saying, I'm going to be a great parent. Well, life sometimes distracts us from the course of being a quote unquote great parent. And that might mean something different to all of us at different times. And that can be situational too. So, manage that list of regrets now. Make a list of things you don't want to regret when it comes to being a spouse and being, what your definition of a great parent is. And then try to make decisions by that. Try to balance your time based on what you don't want to regret when next thing you know, your kids are grown and they're out of the house and you're thinking, wow, should have done more.
I love that. And I think intentionality is a big takeaway for me from our conversation today. And just whether it's family values or things you don't want to regret, definitely something that I'm going to be thinking of. And I think the folks who are tuning into this podcast by nature or are opting into to listen to this probably bring some intentionality into their fatherhood journeys. So hopefully they can implement some of those things as well. Brent, we've talked a little bit of, your book's been weaved in through this conversation, but I don't know that we've actually given the name of the book. And I want to make sure to do justice to you and to the listeners who want to go out and grab that. Coming out next week, which is probably going to mean it'll be out once this podcast gets posted, but what's the name? When's it go live, and where can people find that?
The name of the book is aptly titled 2020. It's aptly titled Embrace the Suck, subtitled The Navy SEAL Way to an Extraordinary Life. It's got a great gut punch of a foreword by friend and teammate David Goggins. When I embarked upon this journey, I figured who better to open a book about mental fortitude and resilience than him. Absolutely. And essentially, just in a quick recap, it's about being intentional in the fine art of comfort zone expansion, about learning how to use pain as a pathway to avoid temptation, to be more disciplined, more personally accountable, have better relationships, remove temptations and distractions that'll take you down the wrong path out of your life, plan better, execute better, debrief with yourself better, being in a constant state of course correction, and overall giving to causes greater than yourselves, and bringing all those things together in order to live a more meaningful, fulfilling, happier life where you achieve more of the goals you set, both for yourself and for others. And it officially drops December 22nd, which is next Tuesday. Like you said, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll probably be right around that time. You can find it on all online retailers. It is available on audio, of course, as well. And also you could get it on my website, which is takingpointleadership.com.
Man, sounds like a perfect fit for some ambitious dads. So please, everybody, go check it out. I know I'll be grabbing a copy once it's out. Anywhere else you'd point people to follow along with you, Brent?
Sure. Someone recently told me that I need to increase my Instagram following. Otherwise, I'm nobody. So I'm on Instagram, Brent_Gleeson, also professionally on LinkedIn, of course. And I'm on Twitter as well. So
beautiful. We'll have that all linked up in the show notes as well as the book. Brent, this was awesome, man. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you diving into the topic of fatherhood.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. I enjoyed the conversation.